Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our panel on emphasizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in workforce modernization, hosted by Leadership Connect. I'm Victoria Hodge, and I'm an Associate Product Manager here at Leadership Connect, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion have long been an issue close to my heart, especially as a Black woman navigating professional and academic spaces. It's challenging to be the only one in the room, and there are times when I've had to remind myself of the James Baldwin quote, "Our crown has already been bought and paid for. All we have to do is wear it." I've experienced firsthand how the movement toward a more inclusive and diverse work environment have impacted me as an individual and as a young professional. It has sparked important conversations, impacted policies, and shifted mindsets. Today, I am very excited to dive deeper into the heart of the DEIA space with two women leading the charge in the federal government, Sangeeta Chari, Program Manager for the Office of Relevancy, Diversity, and Inclusion for the National Park Service, and Lisa Boykin, Chief Diversity Officer for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Turning to you both now, can you tell us about what drew you to the DEIA space and about your roles at your respective agencies, starting with Sangeeta? Oh, let's pause for a moment. I think
Sorry. I'm unmuted now. Again, I'll just thank you for having me for this really important conversation. I'm really excited to be here and to share my experience with you all. Again, my name is Sangeeta Chari. I have been the program manager for the Office of Relevancy, Diversity, and Inclusion for the National Park Service for the past 10 years. A little bit about the Park Service. We are a bureau under the Department of Interior with about 20,000 employees. We are spread across most of the United States and our territories with over 424 parks, cultural sites, heritage trails, seashores, battlefields. We also have regional offices and a national office. We welcome around 300 million visitors each year. And our workforce is currently about 73% white and 60% male. And I would say about 9% of our employees will identify as having a disability. I came to this position I would say through the back door. It was not a position that actually existed. I actually had the ability to create it. My background is in cultural anthropology. I have a master's in it and had about 15 years of experience in nonprofits, museums, and human rights issues and in social services before coming to the National Park Service, and spent 5 years working in our cultural resources department. During that time in 2016, it's about 2013, we started really gearing up for our 100th anniversary, our centennial, which was in 2016. And we coined the term relevancy, diversity, and inclusion because the Park Service wanted to make a very clear shift to say we are not just a set of parks that are out west in the wilderness. We are actually in urban centers. We are connected to you, and we are committed to making sure that every American can see themselves in our parks. And that means seeing yourself actually walking our trails, hearing your stories and the stories that we share, and feeling comfortable no matter where you are or who you are. So I became very interested in that and had the ability to actually detail with our deputy director at the time, who was really looking to start to create spaces within the National Park Service to have honest conversations about diversity. And over time, I was able to transition that detail into a full-time job. And currently now 10 years later, we're a tiny team. There's 3 of us, but we have a large network throughout the Park Service, and I'm touch a lot of folks who are really committed to this issue.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Lisa, let's turn to you now. How did you get involved with this work, and how does it manifest at the ATF agency?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I'm looking forward to the exchange and certainly answering a number of the questions that have been put forth this afternoon. But a little bit about me, I've been with ATF for just over 20 years, and I have been in the human resources space for the majority of that time. I was also in training and professional development for a little while. So I've sort of grown up with ATF and gotten my experience in dealing with very, some challenging issues along the way. Of course, human capital management itself brings along some of those things. But nevertheless, I really have enjoyed my relationship with the practitioners in human capital management, being one myself for quite some time. I moved on to the position of Deputy Assistant Director for Human Resources and Professional Development, overseeing training in our ATF Academy and interestingly enough, our recruitment and diversity hiring division at one point, and also HR. So I've been in and around this topic for quite some time, one way or the other, both directly and indirectly. So a little bit about ATF. We are a law enforcement organization under the Department of Justice with just over 5,000 employees. The majority of our employee workforce is made up of special agents, which is around 2,300. The others are industry operations investigators, which is our next largest number, which is around 800. And then all other professional series make up the balance. We too have a large majority white male population, especially in our 1811 series, our special agent series. And so those are, areas where we're trying to balance out. We do have underrepresented populations across that series and in ATF in general. So there's a great opportunity for us to capitalize on diversifying our workforce. So I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit more about ATF and our approach and what we can do government-wide just to ensure that DEIA is firmly planted across all of government and hopefully influence some private sector folks as well. So I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, please let me know.
No, you did. And I think you both for sharing that context of your agency and the initiatives that you all have began there and transformed that workforce. My next question is kind of directed to the members of our audience that are starting to get involved in this work, that are interested in becoming involved in the DEIA space. What advice would you give to someone who's looking to get involved with this work within the federal government? Lisa, let's start with you.
Sure. I would always say start out with just being yourself. If you don't bring your authentic self to the conversation, it's hard to convince others that you're serious about DEIA, that this is a safe space for them to be themselves and just have honest conversation. I would say just be curious about everything that DEIA has to offer, just in terms of recruitment and retention, professional development opportunities. Just what is it that you want to do in this space? How much of a difference do you really want to make? And just be willing to be flexible. One of the keys I would say always going in is to prepare yourself, because I wouldn't say it's not easy work. Everyone doesn't necessarily embrace the conversation. And when you find yourself in that situation, just remind yourself of why it's important to you. So I would say that's some initial advice I would give to anyone looking to get into this area.
Yeah, it sounds like that eagerness is a really big part of it.
Mhm.
Sangeeta, what is your advice to someone hoping to get involved?
So my advice would be everything that Lisa said, and you have to have a really deep understanding of the issue. And I say that because I think there's a lot of people who are passionate about DEIA, but it doesn't mean that they have read the books, done the work, taken courses, taken classes. I really think it's important to know that you need to know more about this issue than pretty much everyone in the room. There's a lot of folks who want to do it or think they want to do it, and you've got to be able to have the confidence to speak up when nobody else is willing to speak up and to say things that maybe people aren't comfortable hearing. So that's why I think just trusting and knowing that you really know the topic is critical. I've also found that people don't shift because the law says that you ought to shift into this space, or even just because it's the right thing to do. They need to feel that they have to do it. It has to be sort of part of their strategy. It has to be more than just a nice to do. It needs to get to become a need to do. And to be able to do that, you need to have strong strategic planning. You need to be able to facilitate conversations. You need to be willing to get up and speak in public spaces a lot. And I would also say that you need to be able to handle failure. You're going to have a lot of setbacks along the way, and you've got to be able to get back up and know that a lot of people are counting on you to get back up and get back in that space. So I think that's, and I guess the last thing I would say is you've got to be good at networking. You need to be able to build your allies, and to do that means you need to be strong at networking.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, and I hope that that helps the members of our audience that are hoping to get involved in this, looking for those pathways. I'd like to also transition. I know that both of you have had long careers in this space, and I'd love to know, how have the scope and responsibilities in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space changed in recent years? Lisa, let's start with you.
Well, so I will start off by answering it this way. Again, I've been in this space indirectly for quite some time, but directly for just over a couple of years. So some of this is even new to me and is ever changing. So I think in terms of how I see it now in the federal space, just really in terms of making an impression on programs that we currently have and being able to implore others to believe in and do the same. I think before conversations about DEIA, which was originally D&I, and then it went to DEIA, and some say belonging also, which is another term, is a new conversation that has opened up. You know, we've always thought about reasonable accommodations. We've always thought about diversity and inclusion. But I think belonging has become part of the conversation as well, being valued in how you see yourself. So some of the shifts that I see, it's not just R&O data driven. We're talking a lot more about experiences and career professional development, your cultural awareness and experiences, and bringing those into the workplace and being able to talk about it a little bit more freely and openly, to start to build more programs associated with addressing those topics, those issues. So I think from before to now, it's a good space. We're moving, but certainly a lot more we need to do. I recall in 2020, after the unfortunate death of George Floyd, we here at ATF stood up what's called a House and Order Task Force to look at some of our policies and procedures as they were then, as well as our practices related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, just to sort of police ourselves. There was no formal request for it, except that our leadership at the time had asked for it. So it was a great opportunity for us to just to look at how we are operating as an organization, from supervisors to programs, to something as simple as retention and what are we telling people before they decide to leave an organization. Exit survey information. Are we capturing the right things? Are we reading our Fed viewpoint surveys to see what are some of the issues or barriers that exist and how can we make those changes going forward? So I would say it's a moving target, but I know Sangeeta had mentioned something about resiliency a little bit earlier, and I think programs have to be resilient going forward, because everyone doesn't embrace the topic or the notion, and you have to really stand in the conversation and be assured that your goal is to make sure culture change happens.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that's the key point, the culture change. Sangeeta, you mentioned before as well that for your agency, you were part of the inception of this DEI space. Can you tell us about how it's changed in recent years?
Sure. You had mentioned this question to me before, so I've been giving it some thought, and I would say very similar to what Lisa said, that there's this shift to looking from, is DEIA real? Is it really an issue, to sort of understanding this as a culture change topic, that it's really about everyone in the organization having a better place to work. But I think key to that has been a shift from a few leaders really embracing the topic and sort of being champions for it as individuals, to a larger sort of leadership commitment to this topic. I think that has allowed, where I see that shift is now being held, frankly, more reporting on it, right? Like before it was sort of done because it was the right thing to do. Now there's expectations, there's deliverables, there's, the department is wanting to know what we're doing. And likewise, our leaders are getting much more engaged in the conversation and pushing it. So what's happened then is some of the programs that we had developed over time, particularly our employee resource groups, we have a facilitated dialogue program called Allies for Inclusion. We hold monthly calls on different DEIA topics. They're getting greater attention, more participation, and they're starting to really work on figuring out how do we use the voices of employees to push shifts in our culture.
I love that. And I love that the widespread adoption has become such a big point here. I do want to tell our audience for a moment that you all can put in your audience questions into the Q&A chat. So if anything in our conversation pings something in your mind that you'd like to ask our panelists, please feel free to add those questions in. We'll get to them at the very end of this discussion. I'm going to make a transition to talk a little bit more about your organization specifically. So I'd love to hear about what your organization's unique approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is, and how it fits into the federal government's overall goal to be a model for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Sangeeta, can you tell us about this?
Sure. I think what makes the National Park Service unique is the fact that we hold not only our nation, what we consider holding our nation's treasures, right? Both our natural treasures as well as our cultural treasures. So a unique element of our organization is that we're not just looking at our employees, but we're equally concerned about the visitor experience and our impact on how America tells its story of itself. Because we hope, many of our national monuments are actually managed by us. So that storytelling component is super critical to us. So we are looking at, interpreting stories differently, right? Not just telling the dominant narrative, but what are all the other stories out there that need to be told? And in order to do that, that means that we need to train our employees so that they're able to tell those stories, and again, have the resiliency to potentially tell a story that a visitor wasn't coming and expecting to hear, right? They're kind of expecting one narrative, and now we're shifting it. It's also then becomes critical to us to say, then who is that person sharing that story, and do people relate to that person? And are we showing the diversity of the American public because we have the diversity of our American stories? So I think that's been a critical component. Same thing in all of our cultural sites. Many of the sites have historically been telling sort of one narrative, and now we're looking to really expand that. What are the sites? Which parks are coming on, into the national park system? What story are they telling? Whose story is it? So that I think is the unique piece of our story, and what the National Park Service provides, along with the fact, sort of the general commitment to diversity in our employees.
That's very powerful. And I think that's also something unique for the National Park Service, but also for the federal government in general, that these initiatives have the capacity to affect the entire nation. And I think that's something that's so exciting about this space. Lisa, can you tell us about the initiatives of the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive Agency?
Sure. I think it was so unique what Sangeeta spoke about, just impacting culturally across the entire National Park Service. ATF is situated similarly. We are a national organization, international, as a matter of fact. And so we have over 25 field divisions and one headquarters location with a few other program locations across the country. And I think what's unique about us is making sure that we're all speaking the same language about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. It's almost easy to get into a silo and kind of interpret a different message. But when you want your organization to be moving forward in one direction, the message comes from the top. We have a new presidentially appointed, Senate confirmed director in Mr. Stephen Dattleback. And in his initial statement on DEIA, he made it a personal commitment and a professional expectation for us to be on one accord here at ATF. So I thought that was very unique in that he made it personal to him, demonstrating his commitment to DEIA. I think for us as a law enforcement organization, it's definitely going to be community involvement, community engagement. One of the programs that we've set up just this year is called ATF in the Community. This was an idea that came out of two of our employee resource groups, the Black Employee Resource Groups and the Women Employee Resource Group, with the notion of partnering with local high schools and underserved communities to show a different face, right? Sometimes the interaction with law enforcement, whether it's community-based policing or federal policing, may be sort of very abrasive for some. So the idea is to show not only that ATF with the law enforcement arm, is there to regulate, but also there to be a partner. And so the program is really based around mentoring, about providing good career guidance. We offer internships that are unpaid. We are also offering paid internships to individuals who may qualify so they can see the law enforcement at the federal level just a little differently. And so that's one of the programs I'm pretty proud of that we've implemented this year that I think, kind of helps to drive home the message about how ATF is embracing DEIA. Of course, we have crucial conversations that go on. We also have active ERGs. We celebrate a number of the special emphasis months. So we're trying to make sure no matter how far spread we are as an organization that we come together on these topics and we're able to address, enjoy, and have meaningful conversation around them.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think that community involvement aspect is also very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Sangeeta, I'd love for you to tell us about a time that one of your initiatives at your organization made an impact on someone. I think that a lot of us get involved in this work to impact people for the story that we get to make a difference in someone's life. So if you have any examples of an initiative or a program that you were involved in that was able to impact someone at your organization or even more widespread, I'd love for you to share it with us.
So I think the most important thing that my office has been able to do has been to create safe spaces for honest conversation and dialogue. I really believe after doing this for this many years that it really is a sort of a one-by-one person at a time topic. And so I would say that one moment that particularly stands out, or one space, has been in our Allies for Inclusion. It's our facilitated dialogue program where we have small groups of employees that come together to talk about different issues that are diversity related. But the rules are that you need to talk about it from a personal space, from I. And we were having a dialogue around police brutality and its disproportionate impact on African Americans. And I remember just months later, several folks who were part of that conversation, who were in law enforcement and in some of our other offices, talking about the impact of that conversation, hearing for the first time people who are their colleagues having such a radically different experience of law enforcement than them, and the impact that had on how they just viewed the topic of race in general moving forward. So I would say that we did that, we had many conversations that did that, but that one around police brutality was particularly poignant to me.
It is poignant and powerful. And I think it goes to show the power of a conversation and sharing perspectives. Lisa, is there any story that sticks out to you in this work?
Actually, yes, and it is actually what led up to the House and Order Task Force. During COVID, ATF was hosting town hall meetings like once a week. And as part of the town hall meeting, of course, this unfortunate incident happened. And a special agent called in because we were taking live Q&As, and he was struggling with how to talk about the death of George Floyd to his son. And he said, as an African American special agent, how do I have this conversation with my son when I feel so emotional about what happened, but still have to do my job as a special agent and go out and really protect and serve at a federal level? And so it honestly was his question and his very transparent conversation. This is in front of hundreds of people, that he called in and identified himself and admitted that he was struggling and needed help. One, it gave us an opportunity to support him with some EAP resources if he would have needed that. That's employee access to.
Oh, hi, Lisa. I think you might have had some technical difficulties.
Did I?
If you could
Okay,
repeat that last part right there.
Sure. So we provided him with some support should he have needed it and needed someone to talk to, but also it really was what birthed this idea about looking inward at ATF itself and how are we dealing with our employees during this time? What can we do to look at our policies and procedures? How can we improve? Out of that came a review of our, I mentioned it earlier, our exit surveys and what are we asking employees about the experience here and why are they leaving ATF? About our training programs, how are we addressing some of the topics related to diversity in our training? Our hiring practices, our interview questions. It just allowed for us to look at everything to try to make a significant and very powerful difference in the way we manage as an organization. So that's what sticks out to me the most. Was his story was really the catalyst for that.
Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. And I think for both of those stories, what resonated with me was the bravery from both of those people to share their perspectives. I want to move the conversation out a little bit to the DEI space at large. Why is this work so important? Sangeeta, can you share with us first?
I don't know of any other topic and the sort of skill sets that come with it, right? Authenticity, vulnerability, again, the networking, community connection, that is more important for our federal government to take on at this time than DEIA. I think it makes us a better agency. It makes us far more relevant to the American public. And it makes us stronger internally.
Thank you. Lisa, what about you?
I would echo everything that Sangeeta stated. I would also say that, without it, I think we would struggle in a number of areas. Culturally, I think we would fail and miss opportunities to understand others. Not to necessarily be like them, but certainly have that level of understanding. And it's not tolerance, because I think tolerance is more negatively speaking, but certainly an understanding would be more appropriate, and what the needs are in the workplace. That I think is where DEIA really makes its mark. Just understanding the philosophy of differences and changes, whether it's through generations in the workplace, different work series in the workplace, different cultural experiences, backgrounds, your education. You'll be surprised how sometimes your education, where you went to school and where you did not, is a prejudice. And sometimes it's recognized and sometimes it's not. Um, Name bias, the whole nine as it relates to what can potentially hold someone back in a larger space. I think that's why it's so important. We have to flush out these ideas and constantly talk about it, even when individuals may not feel comfortable. We aren't in this space to make people feel totally accept what's being said, but certainly we want to make them feel as comfortable as possible around the conversation, and then just meet them where they are in the conversation is very important.
I agree. It is so important to meet people where they are. I think sometimes the conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility can be individual focused, but I want to know, what are the organization-wide, the agency-wide impacts of these initiatives, of these programs? How does it impact everyone? Sangeeta, can you share with us?
How do these programs impact everyone? How would I think it's an incredibly important retention strategy. I think for many people, I have heard that being a part of an employee resource group, going to these conversations, knowing that those conversations around diversity are happening, have been critical to them staying within the agency. And that many times when they have been frustrated, they've been able to, go to an ERG meeting and feel connected and rejuvenated. And it's particularly important in an organization like us, where our employees are just dispersed everywhere. And many of our parks are incredibly beautiful, and they're also in very small communities, where people, places where people are not necessarily totally comfortable. So I think creating the networks has been a huge element that has positively impacted the organization. I think the other thing has been, by having an office, having somebody who is known as, okay, you're a person I can go to have these conversations, allows people to deliberately bring somebody into the conversation who can bring the DEIA perspective. I think it's sometimes hard when that's not your subject matter expertise to bring that up when nobody else in the room is necessarily talking about it, nor should it be the responsibility of the only person of color in that space to have that conversation, right? So I don't mind the fact that, hey, it's my job, I'm going to be there, this is what you're bringing me in to do, to have that conversation and to push it along a little further. So I think those are the two things that I think have been important at an organizational level, having kind of a clear office that provides that space, and then the networks for employees.
Thank you. And that makes a lot of sense, how it would impact the whole organization as a whole. Lisa, how does that relate to you?
Yeah, I mean, the same. I totally agree. Before, as important as our diversity and inclusion programs were, they were not at a director's level. So this year was an opportunity to increase the awareness of leadership in that space by identifying the first full-time chief diversity officer, and have a place to go for people to bring their concerns, address issues that they may be having. Interestingly enough, as this works throughout our organization, I do work a lot with our ombudsman and also our chief equal employment officer, not in terms of sharing case information, those types of details, but it's really the philosophy of diversity and equity and inclusion. And the way the ombudsman sort of comes into the conversation is the ability to go out and sort of moderate conversations, facilitate conversations with individuals that may ultimately be struggling in these particular areas. So I think it's a great tool to use for that office to sort of let our workforce know that the three offices are sort of working together, but here's a place you can come and raise these issues about diversity specifically. I think since this office has been in place, which has just been since January, even though I've been doing the work for a while now, it has raised not only awareness, but acceptance that the conversation is here to stay. When you see it at a level where you're reporting to the deputy director of an organization, I think now we get the picture. This is not going anywhere. And so the conversation is here to stay. I also think raising the awareness helps to remove barriers in conversation, even in process. I think it allows this office the opportunity to assess process and procedures a lot better and to hold individuals accountable. Here, DEIA is part of our senior executive performance work plans. It's in my work plan as a senior executive and others. So the accountability structure is there, and how well are you promoting DEIA across the organization, and what are you actively doing to engage in DEIA yourself? So that's what I would say about it.
Thank you, Lisa. I think one thing that you both have mentioned throughout this conversation is that it's an ever-changing space, that it's going to change in the future, it's changed in the past. So I'd like to talk about the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do you both look forward to most in this space, within the agency itself, within the federal government, and within DEI as a whole? Lisa, let's start with you.
What do I look for more than this space? I guess more of the same, more acceptance of the DEIA conversation, and hopefully to see it more embedded in the culture of organizations, that it's not something we're trying to push any longer, but we're trying to help support, that individuals and organizations will see it as a natural part of their everyday lives. It's very organic to them in an organization, that they will walk in and see more people of color in certain positions at various levels, and it not be an anomaly. That we would have more opportunity for open dialogue, to be expressive. So that's where I really see the future in DEIA, is that we would open up the space even more and not really have this be something that we're trying to usher in. But certainly, hopefully it has taken hold and we are just managing conversations as we go along.
I'm excited for that. Saying utility, let's look forward to.
I would agree with everything that Lisa said, and I would say one thing is that it's my nature, but I think it's a requirement in this work to be very optimistic. And I do think that we continue to inch towards a space where this is how it's meant to be. This is how it's supposed to be, not this is not a special initiative that will just go away, or an administration initiative. I do think that we are making slow but steady progress towards acceptance, as Lisa said. What I think has been the most exciting space for me has been to see the intersection of DEIA with our health and wellness programs, with our ombuds programs, with building a psychologically safe place, with employee engagement, but really moving away from just seeing it as sort of this one topic that we're going to focus energy on, to understanding that at the root is really about sort of how we connect as humans, and that it's not only about diversity, it is about just our general health and our well-being. And so when I see things like the connection between mental health and isolation, that's another way of framing DEIA. So I think the more that I see that, the more that we are understanding that DEIA is truly a universal issue, and that the more you work on it, you actually impact everybody, I think has been the most exciting thing. At the National Park Service, we've just kicked off a new initiative called RISE. It stands for Respect, Inclusion, Safety, and Engagement. And what it is really a vision for what we want our workforce to look like. And so we're able to use that now to sort of be the framework by which all of our programs are run through, just to ensure many of the things that Lisa talked about in terms of like, why are employees leaving, doing exit surveys, looking at retention strategies, how are we recruiting, but all with that goal that all of our trainings, all of our work together is about creating a respectful, inclusive, safe, and engaged workforce so that they're safer, they're healthier, they're more diverse, and they're happier.
Thank you. I'm so excited for the future you both envision. We're going to take a moment to shift towards our audience questions. I want to thank you all for being so engaged, both before the session with your pre-event questions and as well as currently during the session. Our first question is, can you give us some examples or share stories of successful shifts and how and why it was successful? And maybe an example of something that was not so successful that you learned from. So the wins and the losses, if you all can give a short example of both. Lisa, can we start with you?
Let's see, measuring success. That's always interesting, right? I would say a measure of success is realizing that we removed a barrier to an issue that probably was very much long-standing, that was probably part of a audit report that we were successful in addressing with the OIG auditors, and I would say certainly taking a look at the way we reviewed our promotion system. That was important for us to establish panels for many of our promotion boards and standardizing the process just a little bit more at varying levels in the organization. So I say that was a success because it impacted the entire workforce. If you strove to ascend to a certain level in the organization and you knew that going through this process there was fairness and equity, not that there wasn't before, but they could see it. It was something they could reach out and look up and read and know what to expect. So I think that was one of the successes that we had. One of the challenges I think that we still have is incorporating DEIA in our enterprise risk. We now have an enterprise risk chair that is actively seeking ways to incorporate DEIA throughout the enterprise, meaning identifying areas where we're most vulnerable if we do not accept more of the practices related to DEIA. And I think that's very, that's a work in progress, right? It's challenging, but it's a work in progress. I don't know if it's a failure yet because we're just kind of starting in on it, but I would say it's definitely a challenge for us, but one I think that we will overcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Siggy, to move to you, can you share a success and maybe a loss or a challenge?
So I would say one success would be the adoption of RISE by our leadership and the commitment that they have made. There are about 80 actions related to many of the things that sort of Lisa's talking about around human resources and retention that we are committing to engaging in over the next few years. This is a very new program. We've spent the last year, leadership has spent the last year developing a DEIA strategy that we just recently rolled out under the guise of RISE. So I hope that the next time I would be talking about this, we'd be talking about how we've been able to check things off of that list. In terms of the challenge, I think the greatest challenge is aligning employee expectations with where leadership is on issues. So sometimes they're misaligned. Often our employees are wanting things to go faster. They see things differently. And so making sure that we're communicating and that leadership understands their point of view and vice versa, that the field understands why leadership is or is not taking action on a particular issue has probably been the greatest challenge. I think it's critical to have trust between employees and leadership. And that is a really tricky issue when it comes to DEIA.
That makes sense. I think facilitating that discussion between higher ups and then also the people who are a little bit more junior can always be a little bit tough. I want to move to a question from someone who, during our early part of the discussion about what it takes to work in DEI, felt a little bit discouraged. They said that they work at the FFRDC and that it is only beginning to explore what we should do for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Much of this work falls on the research staff that are not experts in this area. So how can those of us that aren't DE&I professionals become knowledgeable enough to be a part of the solution and avoid well-meaning mistakes? Sangeeta, can you share with us?
So I think the most important thing is always to give yourself compassion and grace around this issue. You're going to make mistakes. The trick is just how are you going to handle them? I will say the National Park Service, much of our progress around DEIA is because of our employees. It was them sort of taking the mantle and saying, we've got to do something different and creating those spaces. So creating the first dialogue spaces was really employees who are passionate about this issue coming together and just hosting them over lunch and saying, come and have these conversations. And it's been slow and incremental shifts. And again, finding who are those leaders who are going to champion this cause. So that's actually one of the things that frustrates me often when I'm reading about how you're going to make organizational change around this issue. There's sort of apparently some magical organization out there where all leadership is on the same page around this, and they're going to set policies and metrics, and the whole organization is going to come along. That is never, that will never happen. And so I think it's really important for people to sort of say, okay, here's where I am and what can I do within my sphere of influence. If you've got, we have sort of employee development plans, individual development plans where I can request training. There's, use that as an opportunity to ask for training on these issues. There's a lot of free stuff out there. Find other organizations, contact me, contact Lisa. We can connect you with some, things that we know. But I think it really is about sort of just taking the initiative and what can you do within your sphere of influence, and just know that if everybody starts doing that, if you get enough of a critical mass, right, that 2% of those early adopters, you start to move the needle. But yeah, the organization is going to do one thing, and as employees, I think you have a lot of space to push within your sphere, and eventually they'll start to connect.
I love that. It's that progress, not perfection mindset, those baby steps moving forward. Lisa, do you have any advice for this person who was a little bit worried about how to get involved?
I think Sangeeta hit it out the park. I mean, give yourself some grace. I know I still do, and I've been in this space for a little while, and I don't have all the answers, and so I do rely on resources that will help me through, or have colleagues now, a newer one in Sangeeta to rely on. I expand my networks to make sure I'm trending on some of the same issues or conversations that will help me get through some of my challenges that we might be having here. But I would emphasize the training. I still take training. I'm taking some training now. I think you can never take too much to give yourself the best orientation to the space as you can. Don't be afraid to ask for the training opportunities. And if you don't get them through your chain of command, then you may have to step outside and get them personally. I've signed up for some personally myself just because it was easier to do it that way. And I wanted to, get it now than wait to have to go through maybe the bureaucracy of paperwork to try to do it. So it's something that I took on myself. But I think being discouraged, certainly I wouldn't want you to feel that way. Please be encouraged by the opportunities that you have in front of you to make a difference. And it does start with the slightest action, and it can just blossom into the biggest reward. But feel free to reach out to either one of us, and we can talk to you about our journey and give you any information that you may need to help you be successful.
Thank you, Lisa. I love that you both have made yourselves resources, because it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel. Dispersion of knowledge is so important in federal agencies and in the space in general. Someone else asked, How do you address DEIA concerns for employees who work in areas or states that are downplaying the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? Lisa, let's start with you.
So I would say just stand strong in your truth. I mean, without being, combative or obstinate about the topics, I think you have to stay true to your beliefs. And if you believe that more inclusion is necessary, then speak to that. If you believe that there are some deficiencies in diversity, then speak to that. There has to be one leader somewhere, somebody is going to listen. The ideal opportunity is to start with your supervisor. And if you are a supervisor yourself, start to talk with your manager. And if you're a manager, speak with your senior executives about the concerns that you have and maybe addressing them as opportunities first versus concerns. And then they may turn into something more palatable, right? Because no one wants to hear, oh, we have problems here. But you may want to say, hey, well, here's an opportunity that we can get more engaged in this, or we can show more support this way. If you don't have an opportunity to celebrate some of the special emphasis programs in the various heritage months, maybe start with something like that, or start with a smaller working group. I think Cynthia had mentioned earlier, building up of resources of people who may be thinking similarly. Hey, we need an employee resource group. Well, let's get one together. Let's, the four of us, three of us, two of us, start the conversation. And then hopefully it will grow from there. But certainly it should not be ignored.
Thank you. And I think that's powerful, the knowledge that you can start small and make that progress. Singita, what is your advice to this person who might be living in a place where people are downplaying the importance of this issue?
I mean, Lisa answered it beautifully. The only thing I would add is to not get overwhelmed or discouraged by sort of the meta narrative that's happening. People are looking for allies all the time. And I think that, as a federal employee, if that's what you are, like as a government employee, you have the strength of executive orders and mandates by the president to do this work. And you can stand strong in that. But don't, it's very, I think it can be very easy, I think, when you hear sort of what's, in the dominant discourse around this issue, to get discouraged, but just sort of try to, I think Lisa is correct. Like if you can start small or find those individuals or find those organizations or sort of, however you can connect in your community to people who align with you. These are universal, really what we're talking about, right? Are sort of universal values. They're really kind of above and beyond laws and regulations. It's about how we connect with each other and how we hear each other. There's always space for that. You may not be able to feel as comfortable talking about it in certain ways. That's fine. Talk about it in a different way. That's part of being in this space, is just being flexible. And I think keeping your eye on your goal and not worrying so much about whether or not it's seamless. It will never be a seamless journey.
I love that, keeping your eye on that big picture and recognizing that this work is about what it means to be human more than anything else. Another question we have, and it kind of gets into the more nitty-gritty of this work. Can you speak to where the field stands with regards to measures and metrics of success and/or measuring the value of various contributions to culture change, like ERGs, if that's a measure? So the overall question is, how do we measure this? How do we measure success? Lisa, let's start with you.
I had a technical glitch, so hopefully I caught the whole question. I think, how do we measure success in the DEIA space?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I want my workforce to be happy, to really trust that individuals who have been entrusted with this responsibility are fulfilling the needs and the desires of the workforce. And that can represent itself in a number of different ways. People feel like they're more open to communicate. They may attend more events. They may see a purpose in doing that. They may come up with different ERGs. Like I had an individual who said, hey, I see what the ERGs are currently doing. I have a new one. I mean, people show interest in what you're doing and how it impacts the workforce, I think is a great measure of success. The other one is, you know, leadership has to make it a priority. And I think when leadership makes it a priority and others see that, then they can garner a measure of success, or we as the program office can, because it's something that shows up in just about all our conversations. It's a consideration now and not an afterthought, right? So, you know, when you're planning an event or you're planning a speaking engagement, or you're planning to interview someone, or you're planning to review lists of promotions, are we now considering everyone based on, you know, their knowledge, skills, and abilities, or are we not? How does that show up regularly and routinely to make sure we see how our organization is changing? I'd love to see more successes in the areas of promotions and opportunities, and that's something we're focusing in on. That's something tangible. That's something people can see when we look at our executive cadre. You know, they want to see, hey, is this really taking hold, DEIA, because of the ever-changing faces? And sometimes that's all people can relate to, say, hey, it is working here at this organization. But we hope to give them much more than that as measures of success. But those are some of the things that I can think of, just removing some of the barriers and have the barriers that we removed certainly no longer be a concern for individuals, and we can stop talking about that particular topic. It's just part of our everyday norm now.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to move to two questions that are directed to one to Sangeeta and one to Lisa that kind of go into depth about the two programs that you all mentioned. Towards Lisa, this person wants to know about the specific types of support that you shared with your agents, and can those resources be used at other agencies? I think this is about that agent that used the resources regarding the shooting and trying to overcome those issues.
Yes, so most government organizations have what they call employee assistance programs. And usually, if they have a health and wellness office, you can find that resource in the health and wellness office. So for ATF specifically, I had the good fortune of standing up a workforce wellness and services division that was in charge of ensuring individuals had access to support if they needed it, which was the employee assistance program, or to the gymnasium, or to like the nursing mothers program, or just a lot of things that we said we need to cater to our workforce about. But pretty much organizations should have, if it's not a contracted service, an in-house service that will allow individuals to reach out to someone. It's confidential, and they can share their challenges, their stories with that individual and get the support that they need. If we have a contracted support, so it's not going to be probably the same across government or even private sector, but I can share that with you, Victoria, in case that person may be able to use that going forward. I will have to get that information and do that for you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mhm.
And to Sangeeta, this person had a question about the specifics behind the facilitated dialogue program. They want to institute that in their organization, and they're wondering about how you went about doing that.
So the way we went about doing it is we actually contracted with a consultant who's an expert in facilitated dialogue around diversity related issues. And we had a small team of about, I think there were 12 of us who were employees who sort of came together and were committed to doing this. And we worked with that consultant to develop the way we wanted the dialogue to work. And the way it works now is that consultant continues to offer to do the training. So we built with the consultant the curriculum, and it's a 3-day curriculum. We do it, a lot of it's virtual now, but it was in person in the past. And the consultant goes through all of the techniques that you need to know, and then we follow up with sort of our expectations and tips and resources of how to do it within your workplace. But I am happy to share all the information about that, how it works, how it's been successful. We also continue once a month. We have calls with all of our allies for inclusion facilitators to sort of continue to build that community of practice. But again, I'm happy to share the curriculum and share any information about the program itself.
Thank you both. And I think it's so helpful to know the process that it takes to get to these programs and get to where you are. It's reached 3 o'clock, and I just want to thank everyone in the audience, thank our panelists for joining us today. This has been such an important discussion, and I've learned so much. I hope everyone else has learned so much, and I can't wait to continue it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It was a great discussion.